Hey guys, welcome to the Son of Wonder. Episode 5 of the Bad Batch has arrived, so let's conversationalize. Alright guys, episode 5 of the Bad Batch, unfortunately, has not gone back up to the heights where we were in episode 3. Like I've said before plenty of times, I loved episode 3 so much. I felt like episode 4 was majority filler. This one, if they don't do anything with it later, if they don't come back to it, which I feel like Dave Filoni will find a way to come back to it, but if they don't, I feel like this one might have been like 100% filler. This episode, we get more information about the character of Fee, who was introduced in the very first episode of season 2 of the Bad Batch. And I don't know if I mentioned her character in my previous reviews, mainly because she was only in one scene. It was kind of like a throwaway scene. But Wanda Sykes plays her. And Star Wars is not usually known for getting big-name celebrities to be cast in certain roles, but they're doing that more and more lately as kind of like cameo bits. And I don't know how I feel about it. There's a certain novelty to having people you don't know come in to Star Wars and just have them become that character. But once you have people who are already established, it's kind of like, oh, that person's Wanda Sykes, or that person's Danny Trejo, or that person's this, or that person's that. So long as you don't overdo it, I feel like it's fine, but I feel like they're going to get into a point where they might be overdoing it a little, but we'll see as the years go on. But we get more information about her character, and we realize that she's a treasure hunter, which is funny, because it's like, I feel like she is essentially a female Lando Calrissian. That is basically what she is. And I know Lando Calrissian is a smuggler, but I'm pretty sure in Legends he was also kind of into a treasure hunting aspect, if you will. And that's what Fee's character is all about. So Omega and Wrecker, at the beginning of the episode, find a bunch of junk. In the junk, there happens to be an ancient compass that Fee realizes is an ancient compass. So they go to this system, I believe called the Kaldar or Cadlar Trinary system. I could be butchering the name. But interestingly enough, the Trinary system has appeared in canon before in some of the High Republic stuff that Star Wars has been doing lately. And so that's interesting. So they might be going in to explore that era of Star Wars a bit more. But the planet they go to has a really cool landscape. It's got like burnt trees with these hills and mountainous regions. It's really cool, and it reminds me of the planet that Mandalorian found Ahsoka on in Mandalorian Season 2. And in that Mandalorian episode, the evil magistrate girl ravaged the landscape like apparently she previously did with the Empire, and this planet's landscape was also ravaged by people. So there is a bit of a correlation there. I don't know if it means anything, but that's interesting to me. There are also some really scary monsters on this planet that at first I thought they may have been dragons. I really, really wish that Star Wars would get into actual dragons more. And I really thought we were going to see some. But they were kind of just these lanky, elongated, like, creatures with these, like, horns on the sides. And Wrecker rips off the horn of one of them, and it was awesome. But still, I have no idea what these things are. They're crazy. But the bottom line is that Fee and the Bad Batch end up finding this mountain with a hidden entrance. This episode is essentially Indiana Jones with the Bad Batch and Fee. And they find all these puzzles. And look, the puzzles are intriguing. The whole idea of what they're doing and what they're exploring is intriguing. They mentioned that the mountain itself, what's inside the mountain, the structure, is so old that it's before the time of the Jedi, period. That's crazy to me. Like, something can be older than the existence of the Jedi, which, yes, that was true in Legends. Like, stuff existed before the Jedi. I don't know if canon has gotten into any of that, but it's interesting to me that they're exploring it now. At first, I thought that may have been the Zetho from Jedi Fallen Order. If you've played that game, that civilization is heavily talked about in that game, and some of its culture and history was explored. And I wondered if they were not trying to do that more in this episode. I thought that would have been really cool. And even the giant robot monster. We'll get to that later. At the end of the episode, its head kind of has a Zepho-style headdress shape to it, similar to the headdresses that were worn by some of the Zepho and the statues in Jedi Fallen Order. So I thought that was interesting. But they explore more of this cave. They have to fight creatures. I like how the Bad Batch themselves are more cautious and are kind of like, when they're falling behind, Fee will be like, hey, you're going to catch up? And they're like, no, we need to be on guard because there's something out there. And, of course, it's a monster. What did strike me in this episode as odd and funny at the same time was when Wrecker thinks that he heard one of the monsters after they had just encountered one. Echo told him, oh, it's just in your head. And to me, that's really out of character because of all people, of all clones, for him to say, oh, that's just in your head, he has experienced so many hidden horrors and terrors and whatnot that you'd figure he'd be the most on guard out of anybody. But he's like, oh, Wrecker, it's just in your head. Says the guy who was stuck on a Rishi moon base with all his clone buddies while there were alien worms running around trying to eat them. And did eat one of them. So he should have all the cause to be concerned after what he's experienced in his life. But what they find is essentially based around a legend that apparently a bunch of pirates like Fee are aware of. And I forget what the exact name of the legend is, but I guess it has something to do with the culture of whoever or whatever kind of people made that structure in the mountain, made that giant monster robot, and what its purpose was. My main criticism of this episode is that, one, I do think it's a little filler. It has the filler vibe, if they don't pay off anything later. Two, we're left with a lot more questions than we are answers, and I feel like there was a lot of wasted potential. Because when you come to me in Star Wars with a premise that says, I want to explore some of the tens of thousands of year old history of the Star Wars universe, I'm game. But one of the caveats for me is I really want it to be Force related. I love learning about the history of the Force, history of the Jedi or the Sith, or even other kinds of people who still knew the Force and were connected to the Force. And that is very possible with whoever made this structure in the mountain. Fee says that the legend talks about the heart of the mountain that they're specifically in. And when they find the heart of the mountain, which is this stone that Fee says could lead to unlocking an ancient power, which I guess is the giant robot. But what I think of when I first hear that is, the Force. Because when you think about it, any ancient spiritual power, because that's what it sounded like, any ancient spiritual power would be Force related because all the spiritual stuff in Star Wars is connected to the Force in some way. But the power it leads them to is essentially just a giant robot that destroys things. And we don't get any answers as to what the robot is. Why did it have a giant laser coming out of its mouth? Who built it? All of these different questions, and it's older than the Jedi, and it's that advanced of a robot. Honestly, it looks more like something that you'd find in Halo, especially the interior. The outside is Star Warsy enough, but the inside especially is that's definitely a Halo. But when Fee turned the heart of the mountain, the stone, and released it from its socket, I knew that there was going to be a Raiders of the Lost Ark callback from when Indiana Jones takes the, I don't know what that thing was, the weird statue head, and replaces it with a bag of sand, and then all the booby traps come on. And sure enough, I was right. As soon as she takes it out, all the things in the building start shaking. And I thought it was going to be a booby trap thing, when the boulder starts coming after Indiana Jones. But it the entire mountain ended up turning into a giant robot, four-legged monster with a really long neck, kind of looks like a giraffe, and shooting things. And I did get genuinely sad when Fee's droid died. But she said its memory was stored in the ship and she can just rebuild the droid body, so there you go. But still, it was just giant robot. So points for unpredictability. But I have to negate points just because they didn't explain anything about the robot other than that the heart of the mountain unlocked that. And I guess that was the ancient power. But I have so many questions, burning questions. Like, I want to know more. What is this thing? How was it connected to the Force somehow? What ancient civilization built it? Again, if it's older than the Jedi, I think that's almost a crux for me, because I'm like, the Jedi should be so founded in the Force. Like, they should be such an ancient order, being around for thousands of years, like they were in Legends. So for it to be older than the Jedi means you have to be super special. And it's not to that special level of like, okay, giant robot that destroys things. That's not, I don't know if that's special enough to be older than the Jedi, which means you have to be like tens of thousands, 80,000, something absurd years old. But they, stop the robot by putting the stone back in the robot, and then the stone melts, and it does look like it has some kind of force energy inside of it. When they first mentioned it, I thought they might be talking about some kind of kyber crystal, and I thought that would be really cool. But no, it was just like kind of glowing purple, blue stone, and it just melts when they put it inside, and the robot falls and gets destroyed. And they advertised the robot in a trailer for Bad Batch Season 2, and I was really intrigued when I saw what's that? But honestly, I don't know any more about this robot than what I did when I first watched the trailer. Barely anymore. Okay, it was built by an ancient civilization. Got anything else? What else are we dealing with here? I really hope that that's going to be paid off later, mentioned again. What I was hoping is by the end of this episode, the Empire would come and there was a disruption on this planet, something happened, we detected something, and we discovered the wreckage of this giant robot, and we discovered that it was from this ancient civilization, blah, blah, blah. I was really hoping we would get that kind of an answer from the Empire if the Bad Batch wasn't going to give it to us. Maybe we'll get that later. Maybe in the next episode or in one of the later episodes, we'll be like, hey, there was this disruption, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll explain who built it, why it was built, what it was meant to do, all of those things. But again, I don't like being left with more questions than answers, and I definitely was. Then seeing them, try to figure out these different puzzles was cool. I don't know if the puzzles were as intriguing as they could have been. They were, they were puzzles, you have to match this symbol with that symbol, and the steps were on the ceiling. I've seen this stuff before, I think is the thing. The steps were on the ceiling thing, that was cool. You rotate the ceiling and you have to walk along the steps that were shining on the ceiling. Again, I've seen it before. It's cool, but I wish they would have done something a little bit more new, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more unique. But yes, that's my basic review of this episode. We didn't get a lot of character growth. Omega and Phee are really chummy in this episode, getting along with each other. Phee really likes Omega because she sees the treasure hunter in her. Omega has another friend. That's not really that big of, character development. I was really hoping this episode would go back to episode 3 and really matter for the story, but I feel like, again, it was kind of in the range that the last episode was, where this is part of the 3 episodes that we just shouldn't add on to the series, that should be like a 13 episode or a 12 episode series. That's what this episode felt like. But again, if it's paid off later, then I will eat my words. And I will say, you will visibly see me eating my words with a fork if that happens. But right now I'm skeptical. But Dave Filoni always surprises me, so you never know with him. He's awesome. And he continues to remain awesome, even despite things like this where I'm like, there was more filler. I don't know if it was for me, but I'm excited to see what you got next. I'm always going to be excited for this series, even if there are certain episodes that I don't like as much as the other ones. But I'm wondering at the end of the day if this episode was not just meant to establish Phee officially as a character in this show, tell us who she is, what she's best at, do all of those things. So that may be the only thing to negate it from officially being called a filler episode. And again, if they use her character properly later, the things that they set up about her being a treasure hunter, if they use that properly later, then that will give this episode a purpose and make this episode better. We'll see. But thank you guys for watching my review. I hope you have a very blessed day. May the Lord be with you. May the Force be with you. Goodbye. And that's a wrap.